Dr. Prasanna Kumar sir, Admiral Anup Singh ji, and elders, and my dear friends. This is first of all my thanks to your office boy. Actually, this week, sometime I wanted to take the appointment of the Admiral and call on him. So it was so nice that it is a God-given opportunity through him to me to meet the Admiral and pay my respects in presence of my Guru and in this forum. Sir, I am also the project director of Varunastra. I have been the number 2 in NSTL till now, and I have taken over just this Monday, last Monday. This series, lecture series, was we are grateful to sir for having accepted our request. Generally, so many videos and audios are there on many performing arts that can be archived and for the people to enjoy and to learn. And the oratory skills of public speaking is also a great art. So somehow we thought that it should also be preserved, particularly for the benefit of the students, to cultivate the habit of good public speaking. And when we have been seeing sir, the meeting after meeting and speech after speech, we sometimes feel that, his speech is over. Not only we, even the people who share the stage with him will also be feeling very bad that it is their turn. They also would like to hear him continuing his speech. So such good orator who can speak, his just oration may come to the professors, but that is a different thing in their own field. But on any subject with authority and the flow of anecdotes just like that coming out of his brain and remembrance is really an enjoyable treat to the ears and eyes. So such great man amidst us, if we don't preserve his speeches for the progeny, and it is a great sin, I thought. So I have been after sir for almost 1.5 years to make him agree for this, and I am very thankful to the teacher in him who actually has made him agree for this. And no doubt to say that our great friend and philanthropist Vijay Kumar Garu is there. So anything which good idea if we give is automatically it will be implemented. And with our MS Srinivas to do all the logistics and Jagat Rao. So we have been doing this. This is the 5th in the series. And whenever sir completes this international affairs, we will cut a CD and release it. And the next series will follow. So I am very happy that today we have a chief guest, real chief guest, chief as the guest. So, and I request Admiral Anup Kumar sir to kindly present the professor with the bouquet to start the function.
The last lecture was on international relations and India in the 21st century, focusing on foreign policy, the challenges that India has to face, has to tackle. I also mentioned that international relations is a young discipline, an old subject and a young discipline. As a discipline, it is young. As one professor very rightly said, it is in search of identity. I submitted for your kind information the various approaches to international relations, the rational approach, the revolutionary approach, and all these were presented, focusing on one important thing, the 20th century. The 19th century was a century of nationalism, they said. The 20th century is a century of diplomacy, they said. If the 19th century was a century of nationalism, the Garibaldis, the Mazzinis, the Bismarcks and things like this, the 20th century was a century of diplomacy. Foreign policy and diplomacy, they go hand in glove. One professor very aptly summed it up. Foreign policy is what you do. Diplomacy is how you do it. That's the difference. So any public policy, foreign policy is what you do, diplomacy is how you do it. Any policy for that matter aims at achieving certain goals. As we mentioned earlier, the conversion of resources into opportunities, into influence, and into power. I drew your kind attention to the fact that the 20th century was a horrible century in the sense that so many people lost their lives. As historian Langsom said, 1 crore of people were killed, 1 crore were found missing, 1 crore were disabled, victims of the Holocaust, the First World War that lasted for 1565 days. The Second World War, longer, more horrendous, inflicted more damage on human civilization than the First World War. If it was a century of wars, two great wars, the First and the Second World Wars, it was also a century of several important developments, unfolding of great ideas. It was a century of Keynes. It was a century of Einstein. A wonderful book was published called The Cambridge Minds. Wittgenstein, Keynes, Bertrand Russell, great minds. It was a century of great minds, Einstein or Keynes or whatever it is. Now, in this century were born 3 or 4 very important institutions, ideas for that matter. Now, you take Franklin Roosevelt, great people, as I humbly mentioned, whether it was Mahatma Gandhi at the national level, or T. Prakasam at the state level, or Potti Sriramulu for that matter, great people are never constricted or hampered by personal tragedy and personal hardship. They have the ability to separate their physical, financial, personal hardship from public duty. This is where Franklin Roosevelt deserved the greatest credit. At a time when Hitler was literally on the rampage, 1942, January 1st, Roosevelt came up with a brilliant idea, a very perhaps off-the-cuff remark. He said, we need United Nations. Nations should come together, and that became the name of the international organization that he really molded along with others. And Roosevelt's 4 great freedoms, freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom of expression, and freedom of religion. These 4 freedoms became the cornerstone not only of the United Nations Charter, but also of many great constitutions, including the Indian Constitution. 4 freedoms. Now, in the same year, interestingly, 42 was a very important year. Beveridge came up with the Beveridge Report, which became the foundation for the modern welfare state. I'm not talking about the socialist state. By the time many isms were there, it became the basis for the welfare state. He said he identified 4 giant evils: want, disease, idleness, ignorance, and squalor. And these 5 have to be fought in order to build a welfare state, said the famous William Beveridge. Interestingly, he was born in India to an ICS officer, and Beveridge became globally famous for launching a new philosophy. The most important point that we have to bear in mind is, was Gandhi suggesting directly, not deliberately? He never wanted, in fact, Gandhi never believed in leaving behind an ism or a philosophy. He said, there is nothing like Gandhism. I don't want to leave anything behind me, after me as Gandhism. No sect at all, he said. But interestingly, political scientists saw in Gandhism an alternative to 3 great isms that began to dominate the 21st century: Nazism in Germany, fascism in Italy, and communism in Russia. And was Gandhi applying an alternative to these 3 isms? Non-violence, satyagraha, whatever it is, India was supplying this. It was around this time that I said that the United Nations was conceptualized and it became a reality. Tragically enough, just before the San Francisco conference, historic conference began, Roosevelt passed away, Churchill lost the election, and Stalin was busy with some other things, and the big three were not there. Still, the United Nations was born. So I referred to the Cold War in my last lecture, how Cold War, there were two Cold Wars, in fact, in political science we used to teach our students. That first Cold War from 1945 to 1963-64, then years of détente, 1963 to 1978, we call the years of détente, because the youngsters are there, our young friends are there. Détente is relaxation of, there is a French word. Entente is pronounced entente, whatever it is. It is friendship, positive friendship. Détente is relaxation of. Cold War is war by proxy, hostility between two powerful systems. It was a bipolar world. We discussed all these things. And as a historian very rightly said, the Cold War lasted from Yalta to Malta. Yalta, 1945 February, Roosevelt, Stalin, Churchill, and they were busy sharing the spoils. You know, ladies and gentlemen, war is a terrible thing. From war, after war comes peace. But people unite in adversity, but sharing of power and spoils is a very difficult thing, all of you know for that matter. That's a problem with the UPA government. There was a beautiful story in European history, modern European history. Maria Theresa of Austria and Frederick the Great of Prussia, they were partitioning Poland. Poland was one country, unfortunate country, that was partitioned thrice, eaten away by very hostile neighbors. And Maria Theresa, the great queen of Austria, while partitioning Poland, it seems she was weeping. And the historian very beautifully said, Maria wept though she kept on eating. Why was she weeping? Not because she was not eating, but because Frederick was eating more. Similarly, in 1945, the Cold War, because it was a rivalry between Stalin in Europe and Roosevelt, they were pushing the, what you call the pawns on the chessboard very, very vigorously. I mentioned last time how, for instance, the United Nations was actually a body of three great powers. Soviet Union, America, and Britain, the big three. But then Britain moved a pawn. I want France, permanent membership of the Security Council. When Britain moved a pawn, immediately Roosevelt moved another pawn. I want China. China was a sleeping giant. It was a sleeping monster, as somebody said. China was absolutely no power at all. Why was Roosevelt moving? Look at this brilliant moves made by Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin. Why was he interested? Not because he liked China, but because he wanted to checkmate Japan. No permanent seat for Japan. And so China became a permanent member of the United Nations. And this is how they were trying to share the spoils. And the Cold War, Yalta to Malta, 1989, it's supposed to have ended. And when the Cold War ended, then began globalization. Especially my students used to ask me a question. This is a very troubling question for me. What is this globalization, sir? No. Amartya Sen, in his argumentative tradition, he said globalization is not anything new. It is not invented by Americans. We knew about it. It is as old as 15th, 16th centuries when people started crossing the seas. When Spain, Austria, England, and these countries were engaged in what you call maritime rivalry after the Renaissance, and then rivalry on seas. That was the beginning of globalization according to Amartya Sen. That's a different thing. But globalization, I shall, just for the benefit of the few youngsters, especially those preparing for the civil service examination, globalization is a buzzword. Globalization is characterized by increase in flows of trade, capital and information, mobility of individuals across borders. It is not a new phenomenon. Global markets, global technology, global ideas, global solidarity can enrich the lives of people everywhere. This is the function of globalization. And one writer said globalization, you can't run away from it. Especially the left parties began to vehemently oppose globalization because they thought it was part of a conspiracy launched by the capitalist powers, the Western capitalist powers. To that, an answer given by a political scientist was, globalization depends on the bicycle theory. Once you get on the bicycle, either you fall or you have to pedal forward. You have to move forward. There is no question of standing on the bicycle. So globalization depends upon the bicycle theory, is based on the bicycle theory. He said, it is a journey, an unreachable destination, a globalized economy in which neither distance nor borders impede economic transactions. World. I mentioned last time that Cold War was replaced by trade war. Omnipotent markets and impotent politicians, they said. Why are you so harsh in describing politicians as important, omnipotent market? Interestingly, it was Tony Blair and Angela Merkel, I think the German chancellor, they met and they said, we welcome market economy, but not market culture. Because even England and Germany, they were afraid of the onslaught of market culture. What is this market culture? Peter Drucker very aptly summed it up. The best in product and the worst in man. That is a market culture. It brings out the best in product. You get the best in product and the worst in man. My own personal experience is what you call unwillingly, I succumbed to my son's pressure to change my car last year. And what happened was somebody leaked it out. I made a deal with a local friend, a youngster who was running Avinash Automobiles. This is off the record. And so that youngster, that boy, I knew him as a student. And so he said, sir, I'll give you the car. Okay, I said. In the meantime, this Varun Motors literally invaded my house. And their rivalry went to such an extent that finally they thought I was useless. So they went and informed my wife that I was losing in the bargain to a tune of 20,000 rupees. And my wife said, no, you have no business to lose 20,000 rupees, your son's, not your money, my son's money. She said, okay. I said, finally, I was a little unethical in going back on my word with Avinash and finally taking the car from Varun Motors, which was unethical to some extent, in my opinion. The simple reason is that such is the chase by the market forces. Even the British Prime Minister and the German Chancellor, they said, we don't want market culture. This is one time. Now, for the benefit of youngsters, before I run through the Indian foreign policy part of it, if I have to exceed to next, because the Admiral is here, I just can't run through. I will close by 7:05, but then, no, if it's necessary, because some very important points, especially my friend Mr. Ramchand, who is appearing for the civil service examinations, for the benefit of such youngsters, a few points need to be clarified from the homework that I have done. Now, the world, therefore, there was a terrific shift in the world, unexpected, unprecedented. I mentioned in my first lecture that, this is the global map. That for the benefit of, if this is the map, at the end of the First World War, 4 great empires collapsed. The Russian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, and the Turkish Empire. 4 empires collapsed at the end of the First World War. Now, many good things happened. I refer to them, it's not necessary to repeat. At the end of the Second World War, if 4 great empires collapsed at the end of the First World War, at the end of the Second World War, the world saw only 2 superpowers. In between, there were 8 great powers. So, from imperial rule to great power dominance, from great power dominance to superpower rivalry. This is the transition in the world. In between, we are caught India. Now, the very important things that happened this time, the map of the world has undergone a change. The focus began to shift. And for the benefit of the youngsters, it can be summed up as 6 important developments in the last 20 years. One, end of Cold War. Two, fall of Berlin Wall, 1989. East and West Germany became one nation after 43 years. Three, breakup of Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. In fact, they were victims of imperial conspiracy in 1918, the Peace of Paris. As it was mentioned earlier, if the First World War was described as a war to end war, the Peace of Paris was described as a peace to end all peace, because it was a disastrous peace. Therefore, the conspiracy that was launched against these weak, small powers by the victorious imperialist powers, the culmination of that process was the breakup of Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. Then, fourth, breakup of Soviet Union in 1991. In 1922, Russia became USSR. By 1991, the Soviet Union became 6 states. Then the rise of China as a superpower. And then the Americans thought that the 9/11 was an important point that should be also placed on what you call global agenda, global map of crisis. Then the American attack on Afghanistan, American invasion of Iraq. These were some of the important developments. The map of the world underwent a change. This is a point I wish to mention. I brought the map for one particular reason, because the youngsters should be interested to know. Robert Kaplan says the 21st century, the shift has been from land to seas. I'm glad the Admiral is here. I'll request him to deliver a lecture. He made 2 brilliant presentations on Indian Oceans. I dare not talk about Indian Ocean and maritime rivalry in his presence. But then the youngsters will benefit. When the occasion arises, we will organize it. But then please remember, if it was the Pacific that hogged all attention till the 40s, Pearl Harbor, 1942 December 7, 1941 December 7, Pearl Harbor. If it was the Pacific Ocean, the largest ocean that hogged all attention, it is the Indian Ocean that is now attracting all the attention. And Kaplan and others predict in the 21st century, the rivalry between China and India will dominate this entire area. It is not United States, it is not Soviet Union. It is not United States, it's not Soviet Union. It is going to be rivalry between China and India in the 21st century, on seas especially, they say. And Robert Kaplan is such a kind of nationalist, bordering on chauvinism. He says, America will make an elegant decline. Not a necessary withdrawal, elegant decline, leaving the entire field to what you call India and China. In this context, a Chinese philosopher once said, a Chinese proverb is, when tigers fight, wise men watch from the mountain top. Let me remind you that China was the wise monkey during the Cold War period, making America and Russia fight it out down below, the Cold War rivalry. The wise monkey it was. Today in the 21st century, America will take the place of China. We'll watch from mountain top as India and China will fight it out according to strategic experts. That's a different thing. I'm not going into that right now. Now, in this context, what is India's foreign policy? The focus of today's lecture is basically on the evolution of India's foreign policy and whether Pandit Nehru was justified. Today, there is a very strong criticism of India's policy of non-alignment. It is irrelevant, etc., etc. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll be happy to know that Vice Admiral Anup Singh is organizing a 2-day seminar, but that will be preceded by a lecture which all of you will kindly attend on July 13th by one of the outstanding scholars and former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shyam Saran will be speaking on India's foreign policy on the 13th of July at Hotel Gateway. Invitations will be issued. You will all kindly attend. Now, the basis of the evolution of India's foreign policy, I want to mention here briefly the evolution of it. The foreign policy of a nation is expected to reflect that nation's total culture. This is a classic utterance. All of us know what is a foreign policy. What is a policy for that matter? Mr. Rangarajan is here. He is heading the NSTL now. He has a policy. A policy is conceptualized. Then a policy is institutionalized. Then a policy is operationalized. A policy is expected to achieve some results, outcomes. Power is always assessed, evaluated by the outcomes, by its outcomes. Similarly, a policy is expected to produce some outcomes, some results. Now, Lord Palmerston's famous quote, 1824, is often mentioned in academic discussions. No nation has permanent friends, every nation has permanent interests. For that matter, not only in foreign policy, in domestic policy also. That is why I often say political science has given, I mentioned earlier, the function of political analysis. Political science has given a message, a moral to all students. In politics, don't ever use two words, if and always. You should never say, if Hitler had not lost in the Second World War, all of us would be talking in German today. Don't ever use the word if. And don't ever use the word always. Take the case of, I don't want to particularly mention, the DMK and the ADMK overtures today, and the madam in Delhi deciding. All these are at a national level. We will not run into that. But a foreign policy, the evolution of India's foreign policy took place during the freedom movement. I talked about the freedom movement on 2 occasions earlier. I don't want to go into that. If Mahatma Gandhi is credited with a contribution to modern world in the form of a new ideology that differed from capitalism, that differed from communism, that differed from Nazism, that was different from fascism, called non-violence or whatever it is, which a person like Nelson Mandela the other day said is more relevant than any ideology, is more relevant, more, to use his words, eternally relevant. And the poem that Martin Luther King Jr. composed on non-violence, paying tribute to Mahatma Gandhi, is a classic in modern literature. Therefore, this kind of was Gandhi. Similarly, was Nehru here giving to the world a third approach, different from the capitalist approach, the first world, the Western capitalist, Western societies, the second world, dependent on the Soviet Union, the leftist countries, the European countries headed by Russia, the third world, the Janata compartment, all the 100 nations in the world who have neither ideology nor power nor influence, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, the Pied Piper of Hamlin of those times. Now, if this is the case, Jawaharlal Nehru, very interestingly, was Gandhi's mentor, according to Bimal Prasad, in the making of foreign policy in international. In 1922 or 23, Gandhi wrote a letter in which he said to Nehru, in these matters, I follow your advice. Very interesting. Mahatma Gandhi's choice of words is always very, very crisp. He never uses one word extra. In these matters, what are these matters about foreign policy? In these matters, I leave it to you. You are my guide, he said. And therefore, Gandhi was Nehru's student in foreign affairs. Hiren Mukherjee, one of our outstanding scholars and parliamentarians, he says, none of his colleagues, however resistant to some of Nehru's ideas, could challenge his authority in foreign policy. None of his colleagues, however resistant they were to his ideas. So India's foreign policy began to evolve in Jawaharlal Nehru's exposition of Indian philosophy foreign policy. It all started in the year 1938 at Haripura Congress. Haripura Congress, ladies and gentlemen, 1938 at a time was the world was on the brink of the Second World War. The war clouds gathered thickly in the skies and nobody was talking about peace. And at Haripura, Nehru said, I am quoting him, the people of India wish to live in friendship with all countries, that India would work for international peace and goodwill, cooperation. Many people laughed at this. You are talking of international peace, cooperation and goodwill at a time when Churchill, as I quoted the famous John Gunther, who said, when Chamberlain was taking weekend in the countryside, Hitler was taking countries in the weekend. At a time when Hitler was on the rampage, Nehru was talking about international peace, goodwill and things like this. And Nehru, I'm quoting him, inherent in the circumstances of India, inherent in the past thinking of India, inherent in the conditioning of the Indian mind during our freedom struggle, Buddha's concern for humanity, Ashoka's spirit of renunciation, and Gandhi's non-violence were the core of Nehru's philosophy and articulation of foreign policy goals. Nehru, this is a very interesting thing. Please remember, all policy is always a product of contradictions. Even at a personal level, we may compromise. That is why somebody said, when the spoken word is different from the committed deed, this is a contradiction. The spoken word. On the platform, Nehru said peace, goodwill and things like this. And in Nehru's non-alignment, I will quote Kissinger shortly, how harsh he was against India's foreign policy. Interestingly, that man is alive. And that man's latest book, part of it was published in a newspaper column the other day, very revelatory and very complimentary towards India. The man who literally blasted India's foreign policy makers, I shall quote shortly. The man today went back on his word, because academics should never be rigid or should not be particular about being consistent in their exposition of theories and ideas, because you can always say, I change my ideas with the change efflux of time. So Nehru declared that the world, a groaning world, required a message from India, and that message comes from India, he said. And probably some people saw in it the inspiration of Indian Renaissance as evidenced by the work of Tagore, the work of Vivekananda, etc., etc. That's a different thing. Now, 1938, Jawaharlal Nehru, therefore at Haripura Congress, proclaimed India's future foreign policy goals as international cooperation, peace and goodwill. In 1946, he became the vice president of the interim government, in which he said, India will have closer relations with neighbors and good relations with all. This closer relations part of it was forgotten till the time of Indra Kumar Gujral, according to one expert. We forgot about this. You will agree with me that foreign policy normally is articulated keeping in view in political science theory, they say, two systems. This is the subsystem. This is the subsystem is the region. The main system is the globe. So India's foreign policy did not care for the neighbors, according to Venkateswaran, till the time of I.K. Gujral. It was only Gujral who said, every leader enunciated his own approach or her own approach for that matter. For instance, Nehru was so impressed by the early success of India's foreign policy, especially when he made Chou En-lai come to India, when he made Khrushchev and Bulganin come to India. And as Geoffrey Tyson very rightly said, Nehru did not need to go to New York to meet the world press. The world press came to Delhi to hear him. That was the height that was scaled by Jawaharlal Nehru in the enunciation of her foreign policy. In 1947, this is a very important development which was commended by his biographer Gopal. India did not become free. There was no hope of India becoming free at that time. Soon, March 23rd, 1947, India convened Asian Relations Conference. More than 20 countries attended this conference.